Hello and welcome once again to This Is Metal with Joe Lawson. How you doing tonight, Joe?
Doing good, doing good. Looking forward to tonight's episode.
So am I, and I need to tell folks again, give credit where credit is due. This was an idea Joe came up with, very much like our Axemen for Oz special that hasn't aired, but that will be getting posted in a few days, probably within the first week of May or so. And you can check our This Is Metal fan page for updates on when all this is going to be posted. But tonight we're doing a special on Mr. Scary, which of course is George Lynch. And initially, me and Joe were talking about ideas for this, and I thought, Joe, there's so much stuff to talk about George Lynch. Let's, why don't we do like one on Dokken and one on Lynch Mob and one on all his other projects? So it's going to be like, originally I was kind of thinking it'd be cool to do 3 episodes, but Joe says, let's just do 1 episode, call it Mr. Scary, and we'll just fit in whatever we can. And I think Joe's right about that. So, of course, most people know George Lynch from Dokken. I mean, that's the band that really made the guy famous. And I'm sure that's where you discovered George Lynch too. Do you remember what the record was that was out at the time when you first discovered Dokken and George Lynch?
I think the first time I ever remember hearing them guys, I think it was Under Lock and Key.
Interesting, and that's kind of an album that I want to say kind of broke them in the sense that the first 2 albums a lot of people will point to like Tooth and Nail and Breaking the Chains, because those are like really kind of harder edge. There's more of an edge to those first 2 albums, much more of a metal element, where Lock and Key is more like melodic hard rock. They were trying to get on radio at the time, and that's like you said, that came out in '85. That's the 3rd album. That's kind of an album that really broke from here in the States. But I think a lot of people that are really into metal, people listening to this, Joe, probably will either go more towards Tooth and Nail or Breaking the Chains. I like Breaking the Chains because that was kind of the very first Dokken album, so that's the first time a lot of us heard Dokken,
Right. Yeah, Dokken to me was one of those bands. They had good songs, especially for the time and the era. But what really stood out to me, even now when I go back and listen or I hear those songs, what stands out the most to me is George Lynch's guitar playing.
Yeah, amazing.
I wasn't a real big fan of Don Dokken's voice. I mean, he was all right.
Yeah.
He had his place, and he did well. The band was successful. I mean, even all these years later, going back and listening to those old records, one unique thing that I want to dive right into here with George Lynch is George is one of these guys that he can play just as fast as anybody else on guitar. But he chooses not to, and I'll tell you why. And this is what makes George unique as a guitar player. His note placement. He milks each note. He squeezes every ounce of soul out of those notes. And over time, he learned how to do that, and he just gets better and better at it. And his sense of melody and placement are just over the top. I mean, there's not too many guitar players that I think are better at that than George Lynch is. And
here's the thing with George Lynch. I mean, he's such a diverse player. I mean, he's known mostly for like being a metal guitar hero, but he can play. He's such a diverse player that he can play almost anything that he puts his mind to, which is what we're going to really be talking about. But getting back to Dokken for a minute, that's the band where a lot of us first discovered George Lynch, and it's kind of interesting. Like we opened up, I mean, Tooth and Nail and Breaking the Chains was the very first album. Follow-up was Tooth and Nail, very, really hardcore metal album.
I sang both of those in cover bands.
Yeah, for its time. And then by the time, probably the first breakout real big hit single was the ballad Alone Again. And like you're saying, that's a great tune, for a singer like Don Dokken, but... when people think of Dokken, that's one of the first songs they think of. Oh, Alone Again. Yeah, they're that one-hit wonder band. That's the band that did Dream Warriors. That's the band that did, Alone Again. But those are kind of a radio hits, if you will, or some of them. But that people remember. But there's much more to the whole Dokken catalog than just those 2 tunes. I mean, even so much to the point, by the time they get to the fourth album, which was called, here's an interesting story, called Back from Attack, the fourth album, the song Mr. Scary is on there, which is like just a George Lynch instrumental tune. And that's where a lot of people thought, wow, that's kind of his eruption, if you will. And on that one track, that's what George, from that point on, became known as Mr. Scary, very much like Gene Simmons when he sang God of Thunder. From that point on, he became known as God of Thunder,
Right. Interesting quick story for that with Back to the Attack. When I was out west, I was doing some pre-production work for what was supposed to be a Blind Rage record that never happened.
Yeah.
But I was working with Robert Mason and Sean White. They were going to produce the record for us.
Wow.
So I was in the studio in Tempe, Arizona with them, and I seen this guitar rig, and this thing was like 5 feet tall, man. I mean, it looked like it was NASA Control Center ready. And I thought, what the fuck is that? Wow.
Yeah.
Whose rig is that? And they told me that's George Lynch's rig. That's the rig that he played Back for the Attack on.
Yeah.
I said, that's the exact rig? And they said, yeah. I'm like, that's fucking awesome.
Wow.
I'm standing right next to it, I'm like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And but just to put things into perspective, everybody thinks that these guys are loaded and they're filthy rich. Some of them are.
Yeah.
But George has really went through some tough times.
Yeah.
And and I'm telling the story not to be disrespectful to George, but I'm telling the story to put things into perspective.
Yeah.
And so what had happened was, how did this recording studio acquire George Lynch's classic guitar rig?
Wow. Yeah.
And he didn't have the money to pay the studio bill.
Wow.
So they kept his guitar rig.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Wow. Yeah, I've heard stuff like that.
So that's what I mean. Some of these guys, they put their whole heart and soul into this, and sometimes it works out, and they make good money, and sometimes they're losing their guitar rig.
Oh yeah, and a funny story about Dokken too is you go back to talk about that fourth album, Back for Attack. That's the album when they were on the Monsters of Rock tour at the time, which was like Van Halen, Scorpions, Metallica, and Kingdom Come, and they're like four of the biggest bands at the time, and I've heard both Don and George talk over years that the band was like on fire. That album was really kind of breaking them, and that was a big tour to get on, and yet there was constant fighting within the band, mainly between George and Don. I mean, like their feuding was legendary, feuding between Don and George, and people were always talking about it. But it got to a boiling point that they were saying by the time that tour ended, because also on that tour, I'd seen them in Long Beach, California, when they opened up. They were the opening band on Aerosmith's comeback tour, which was Permanent Vacation, which is the album that had like Dude Looks Like a Lady and all that. And
Right.
and they were primed and ready to like go on a headlining tour, but they did like one more tour in Japan. They did a live album, and then the band just imploded, and they fell apart for several years till they got back together. But getting back to Back for Attack was an interesting album too, because there's a radio station in Long Beach where I lived at the time. They played nothing but metal and hard rock, and Dokken was all over this radio station at the time, playing all the tunes off this album. And they had a title track called Back for Attack, was not on the album, but it was like a import or a B-side or something. And they're like, okay, we're going to call the album Back for Attack, but we're not going to have the song on there. And then Mr. Scary and some of these other songs kind of just took off, and it was like they were really getting ready to get to the next level, but they never really did because of all the constant infighting.
Right. Yeah. I've heard stories about that too as well. With the feuds between Don and George specifically.
Yeah, and
pretty bad. And
before we move on to talking about the next band, Lynch Mob, but the final thing too about Dokken right now is this. I mean, it got so crazy the feuding that you never would have thought that the other guys in the band could sue over the guy that started the band, sue him over his name. But it got to a point where Don thought, well, okay, all these other guys, I'm just going to get some other guys and start my own band, and it's still going to be Dokken. And they said, oh, no, you can't do that. They sued the guy over the name Dokken, took him to court, and they decided originally, and this is like back in 1987 or 1988, but Judge agreed, yeah, okay, it's like a partnership, it's like a business, so you can't call your band Dokken unless these other three guys are in it. And here's the interesting thing. They eventually got back together and reunited, and then one by one, like first, George left, Jeff left, and then I think even Mick Brown left. And so one by one, Don said, okay, you guys aren't going to sue me again. So when they reunited the last time, he said, okay, you guys are all going to sign a contract, but if any one of you leave, then I get your percentage in the band's name. And so now Don owns the name outright. Talk about learning from your past mistakes. Yeah.
Yeah, and that would be rough if that's really his last name. He couldn't even use his own last name.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be a joke, Yeah, he literally.
I see the judge's point.
Yeah.
In the humble beginnings of Dokken,
yeah.
They all contributed. They all probably built that band up into what it was.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Don.
Yeah.
So, but Lynch Mob actually was a project that I liked even more.
Yeah.
I think George was growing as a musician, as a songwriter. I think some of the guys, of course, he had Mick Brown on drums, Anthony Esposito on bass,
and Oni Logan.
And Oni Logan was a good singer, man. I like his voice.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing:
he had some trouble. He had some troubles, and this isn't a big secret, or at least I don't think it is.
Yeah.
But he had some troubles with his voice and had some problems, and I think he even ended up having surgery. But so it was difficult for him to meet the demands of a touring schedule, and that's what led to Robert Mason coming into the band.
Yeah, well, here's a few things on that a lot of people may not realize. Going back to Dokken just for a minute, a lot of people think because Don Dokken's the singer, but he wrote all those tunes. He wrote some of them, but for a lot of the writing, like especially like something like Dream Warriors, which was a popular radio hit. Jeff and George wrote a lot of those tunes together, so they were a big part of a Dokken sound. Not just because they were in the band, but because they wrote a lot of those.
Those guys are great songwriters, great producers, great singers, great songwriters, and their catalog shows that, especially now.
Yeah, and here's
those guys have done together.
Yeah, here's the interesting thing about Lynch Mob. They got off to a great start with that Wicked Sensation album. Now, I will tell you, I mean, that's going back over 30 years, just that Lynch Mob album. So he's had just as long of a career with Lynch Mob as he's had with Dokken. And here's interesting.
Yeah.
You go back to that first album in 1990. I remember first time I heard that riff on that track, on the title track, Wicked Sensation. I mean, it was a monster. It was a monster track, monster riffing, and it really showed that George could go out on his own and kind of do his own thing. And then he had his, buddy from Dokken, Mick Brown on drums. And Mick, let's just talk about him for a minute because, Mick was the one guy that kind of stayed with Don after the band reunited until just last year because I guess he's been drumming since he was a young lad. I don't know, but like in his teens. And he's been playing the drums for over 50 years, so much to a point that he just can't physically play anymore. He was kind of forced to retire. He told Don, "Hey, look, I just can't do it physically anymore. My body just isn't capable." And that's why when we get to talking about the In Machine, which is another band George currently has going on, Mick was originally in that with him and Jeff Pilson. But again, he told George, "I can't even do the album." They recently recorded a new album. And he has his younger brother, Steve Brown, who's now working on that. So that's kind of an interesting note. But, I mean, Mick Brown, I just think it's important to note that talking about George Lynch tonight, but, man, he's a rock, he's a metal god, a metal soldier. I mean, he played till he just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's cool that they kept it in the family, that he gave the gig to his younger brother.
Yeah, and
that's really cool.
Yeah, and getting back to Oni Logan, I had the chance a couple times to interview him, and he was telling me too a huge part of why he left after. Like I was asking, why did you leave Oni after just one album with the band? And he said a lot of it too had to do with the fact that he goes, Lynch Mob at that time was the biggest thing I'd ever done, and he was telling me, so I go from like playing these little tiny clubs to being on these national tours and playing these big arenas. It was just so. It was so much. It happened so much, so fast that it got to a point that I was so young that I couldn't handle it at the time.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure that was a lot to take in as you're a young guy.
And then stuff. And then what's sad too is like like, I mean, you listen to that debut album. It's 30 years later. It's still a monster album, and
it's a fantastic album. I mean, songwriting, production, guitar, vocals, just everything, just really good, tasteful music. You know. I think that George has just got a knack for that. Almost everything I've heard him do has that flavor to it. You know?
And I will say that I like all the Lynch Mob albums, but I will say, because he's done more than just, since that first album, Oni's come back and they've done quite a number of albums together. And
sure.
I will say, I think the stuff with Oni, the albums he's done with Oni, are probably the best Lynch Mob albums. Not that I didn't like the other ones, just only because, I don't know, it kind of proves that him and Oni have kind of a connection, kind of a great chemistry, because I don't know what it is, but when they get together and write stuff, it just kind of, there's that magic, like there was with the Beatles.
Yeah. I mean, I think there is definitely a chemistry there between them. I wouldn't go that far, me personally. But
no, but I mean,
I think it's good for sure. Oh yeah, and it's noticeable.
And I think once he came back, years later, and they started doing more albums together, it kind of just was feeding off of what they'd already done. Back in 1990 with the debut album. I mean, because you're like, man, if he had stayed in the band for the whole time, just to think how much bigger of a band could have got. And it's just kind of, if you stop and think about, I don't know why it is, but the albums he and, in my opinion anyways, that him and Oni did together, I mean, there's just a special chemistry when they get together that I think those are the best Lynch Mob albums.
Yeah, and I think most of the fans would agree with that, the only album I didn't like really was the '99 Smoke This.
Yeah. Let's get into that.
He was trying to cash in on the latest trends and fads, and it was just ridiculous.
That's really the only album
I thought.
I'll tell you,
I didn't like it at all.
In George's career, there's only really 2 albums I didn't like, and that probably is at the top. I mean, that probably beats everything as far as saying I didn't like it. That's probably the one I would definitely throw out. And the other one would be Dokken had this album that came out in 1995 around the grunge area, and it was this album you probably don't even probably not even be familiar with any of his songs. It was so memorable I can't even think of one song off of it. But the album was called Shadow Life, and Don Dokken refers to it as Dokken's grunge album.
Alternative grunge attempt.
And he kind of blames George Lynch because, like I said, George does a lot of the writing and Jeff, and that's kind of a direction they wanted to go in at the time. And he says that's what they want to do. That's what came out. I wasn't really pleased, and he's like, I kind of got fans kind of backed me up because the fans didn't go out and support it,
Right. Let's back up just a little bit for a second, and I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but in '93, George Lynch put out his first solo record called Sacred Groove.
Yeah, I can.
I love that record. I mean, it's just so tasteful, and he had Glenn Hughes,
Wow.
Ray Gillen, all kinds of top-notch, badass vocalists on it, and phenomenal players. And once again, Jeff Pilson played bass and did a bunch of stuff with him, work on it. And man, it's just a great record. And I don't think a lot of people are even really that familiar with it unless you're a true George Lynch fan.
In fact, I'll tell you, I know exactly. I can't. Again, I've never really taken the time to check that out. I know exactly what you're talking about. I can just picture the album cover. I've seen it a million times, but
real tasteful, tasteful playing on it.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing I will say about that. I mean, just what you were talking about there, Joe. The guests that were on it. It makes me want to go out like on Amazon and go purchase it just to kind of check it out, or maybe.
Oh yeah, it's definitely something you want to have in your collection.
Go on YouTube because see, with a guy like George Lynch too, it's all about the vocalists. Probably the two. My at least 2 favorite vocalists he's worked with, Oni and probably Don Dokken, just because that's the bulk of the stuff I've heard. And but I will say I would love to hear him do a song like with what you're saying, Glenn Hughes and the late great Ray Gillen. Ray Gillen was one of the guys too. He died way too young. I mean, when people think of Ray Gillen, he was briefly in Black Sabbath, but we really remember him from that Badlands album, that first one. And that's another one that's kind of really hard to find. So something like that to hear the late great Ray Gillen kind of doing a tune with George Lynch, I would just love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then not too far ahead into the future, but in the early 2000s, in 2002, 2003, he formed a band with Jeff Pilson, releasing it under the Lynch Pilson name, Wicked Underground.
Oh yes, I forgot. Yeah. And see, that was a little more of a...
There's all these little gems out there, people, I mean, if you really start digging and start looking, man, George Lynch has done a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, I bet he's got at least, I mean, probably more, but I dare say he's got at least 20 albums, in his catalog of music, probably more, like I said. But just the stuff he's done with Jeff Pilson, there's so many of those to name.
Oh, yeah.
I think besides the Dokken connection, the other reason I think him and Jeff have done so much together is... the stuff they write together, they get together and they could be writing for Wicked Sensation, they could be for the Endgame, whatever. And then on top of it, Jeff is a super talented guy, not just as far as he can play bass, but he's a great songwriter, like we said. He can also sing lead. I mean, going back to the Dokken album Under Lock and Key, he sung lead on the track Just Got Lucky, but of course. He's not going to be doing his lead vocal thing in Dokken. That's Don's gig, of course,
Right. Yeah, but going back to this Wicked Underground thing, so they did 26 shows in 30 days.
Yeah.
And they had a performance on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
Wow. So
I thought that was pretty cool. With drummer Vinny Appice played drums on that.
Yeah,
so I'm going to have to look that up because I bet that was a killer performance. Andrew Freeman on vocals, and Martin Anderson from Lizzie Borden, Starwood, and Legacy played bass.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing is...
I'm sure that was a killer performance.
And then Lynch Mob eventually became kind of like so many guys in and out of that band. I mean, him and Oni were like the two main guys, like I said, and then Robert Mason came in, like you said, for the second album. But after that, I mean, almost every tour they did, they had different... Like you said, I think Andrew Freeman was a vocalist for a while. I think Vinny Appice did even some Lynch Mob gigs, as far as playing live with the band. I have to look that up, but they had like guys like Robbie Crane. He used to play in Rad and Vince Neil's band, and eventually, the thing with Lynch Mob that's kind of interesting. It's kind of come full circle because him and Oni had just gotten back together. They were supposed to be working on a new album, but at the last minute, because of all this. Political upheaval that's going on currently and this racist stuff. It's I was hearing people talking about being racist. After 30 years, George decided he wanted to drop the Lynch Mob name, and he's like, I just think it's too controversial.
I know. I think that's just so fucking gay.
Yeah.
You know what? You're in a rock band, dude. Grow some hair on your balls, and have a spine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm gonna put my finger right in the face of this bullshit.
Yeah, that's what
Here it is. Be proud of what you worked so hard to establish, and the fans respect it. The fans appreciate it, and it has nothing to do with racism. And everybody that loves that band knows that.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Yeah, here's the thing.
So fuck all the little fucking crybabies and whiners and fucking shit starters. That's the name of your band.
Yeah.
It's been the name of your band for 30 fucking years. Don't be a spineless fuck and cave into that bullshit.
Yeah, here's the thing.
So there he lost some respect from me.
Yeah, me too. Because here's the thing with that, George. Okay, I could kind of even see if the band had just been it's just a new band coming out in 2021, putting out their first album, and people are starting to trash it, saying they're not going to play it on the radio. But like you said, see that's what kind of gets me about it is Lynch Mob. Like I said. He's got
they've been a band for 30 years.
30 years.
And now it's all of a sudden a problem?
Yeah, and see, here's...
all of a sudden racially insensitive?
And here's the thing.
Give me a fucking break.
And here's the other thing, too, with that. Like you're saying, okay, so you're going to destroy 30 years of work that you put into this band and down the drain. And what gets me even more than that, I don't even think it's because of any of these woke people or... I mean, he put out a press statement that I never felt right about. Well, bullshit. I mean, yeah, I remember when the band first came out, there was a little bit of controversy. Probably not like there would be today, but I think this has more with him being woke or trying to, virtue signal. Well, I'm going to do the right thing, which kind of gets me. So you're going to throw 30 years of hard work down the drain, and then in his press release he recently put out about it. I forget what he's going to call. Like he's going to have a touring band, and because he's got all these projects, so. He's decided to go don't quote me, but he's going to call it something like the George Lynch experience, and I wasn't paying enough attention to it because I don't really care. You know what I mean? He's like, it's that way we can go out and we don't have to just play Lynch Mob and Dokken. If we want to throw in a KX tune, we want to throw something off the machine, we can do that. So that's kind of his idea. And if that's the reason you're doing it, I wish you would have been a little more honest about it and just trying to virtue signal.
Yeah, right, exactly. Instead of jump on the bandwagon to appease the mob.
Or I even think,
pun intended.
I mean, I really do think it's even more about, not am I just going to put out a press release, but I'm going to virtue signal here. I'm going to make everyone, try to get everybody to come over to my page and like me and, virtue signal here and try to, I want them to know I'm a good person. But if that's really what you care about, why 30 years ago when there's, initially...
Yeah, why all of a sudden now is it a problem? Because society's full of weak, spineless fucks.
Yeah.
It's a problem now.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear... Yeah, I'm glad to hear...
Don't listen to it then because you're too big of a pussy.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but, I agree with you.
Sorry, I'm not sorry.
Well, that's good because I really do think...
This is metal, right?
Yeah, this is metal. This is a real world. I mean, it just amazes me that somebody would, ruin 30 years of hard work down the, and so like what? So now, I mean, it gets getting so crazy that not only does he want to, use a Lynch Mob name anymore, but eventually, I mean, it gets so crazy where these people that own like the social media companies like Twitter and Facebook, we're not going to be. And we're not going to allow the Lynch Mob.
Curious George or Curious George.
It really is crazy. Like,
right.
Like you have Maxine Waters. I hate to get political for a minute. Going out and telling people to get violent if they don't get the verdict they want. Now she gets to. They don't close her down on Twitter like they did Donald Trump. Whatever. But that's how crazy this stuff gets. Somebody could see the name.
And it pisses me off when it gets into music, man, because it kills the vibe, it ruins things, and it divides an already small fan base.
Yeah.
So why would you want to do that? These guys, these musicians and stuff that come out and run their mouth, whatever their opinion is, whether it's right, left, or in the middle, whatever. Why would you want to alienate half your fans?
Yeah, and I get.
I mean, it's just. It's career suicide.
Yeah, I get it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
just stick to playing good music, man. Just do that.
And then I get that it's George Lynch's Lynch Mob or whatever, but. That also kind of destroys 30 years that any of the other musicians that went in and out of that band can't let anybody know he's in Lynch Mob because it's not politically correct to say that,
Yeah, it's a bunch of crap. But let's move on, man. Let's talk about these projects now. Some of these other projects. You had mentioned KXM.
Yeah.
With Doug Pinnick of King's X. I mean, the guy's phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
Ray Luzier, the drummer from Korn.
Yeah.
Now, Ray, if I'm not mistaken, I'll have to double check with our bass player, T.R. Miller.
Uh-huh.
But Ray played with T.R. in Musicians Institute. Those guys jammed. He jammed with that drummer before he was ever famous, before he was ever in Korn.
Well, I'll tell you another thing about Ray Luzier you may not know about. This may surprise you. But when I first started interviewing people, I was doing like these little email interviews at the time where you'd email people and post it on the internet. But anyway, he was one of the first guys that I ever interviewed, just, kind of going back and forth through email. And at the time, you're not going to believe who he was playing with, David Lee Roth.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I totally believe it. That guy's a killer drummer.
Yeah, and
why not?
And he's the interesting thing about Ray is, he's become so much bigger just since like joining up with Korn. And he also used after leaving David Lee Roth, before he ever joined up with Korn, he also played in this band. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, the Nixons.
I've heard of the name, but I'm not real familiar.
Kind of like an alternative band. They were big at the time.
Yeah, that's why I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, but that's the thing with Ray. He can do all kinds of different types of music. And the interesting thing is when,
talented guy.
A lot of people think he's, he's even bigger than the guy he replaced in Korn is what I'm saying. He's more popular. Kind of like the Eric Carr, if you will, that just as many people, I'm talking about Kiss fans loved Eric Carr, but loved Peter Criss, So it's kind of interesting. He's more popular, Ray Luzier, than the guy he replaced in the band.
Right. And now another project that is a little bit more recent that Frontier Records. for people that don't know this or don't understand they go through and they put these bands together. They slap these projects together with different famous people, and they target their demographic. They know what their fans will buy, what they want, and they put these bands together. And these guys get paid to put out albums from Frontiers Records. So this is the situation with Sweet and Lynch. Michael Sweet, phenomenal singer,
from Striper
frontman. Love the guy. Great guy, great singer. I mean, he's just got an angelic voice. Awesome singer. And with George, I was really looking forward to this. James Lomenzo, I think, was on bass, and Brian Tishy on drums. I mean, what a lineup, right? You know? But I got to be honest with you. I mean, the stuff individually, if I listen, as I'm listening to these songs, the performance is stellar from each person. Because these guys are all polished professionals. But the chemistry's just not there.
I think part of
the reason, I mean, it's not terrible. But I'm just not feeling it. I mean, let's not connecting. There's a disconnect for me.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, we probably wouldn't be buying it if we didn't, if it wasn't for Michael Sweet or George playing on the album. And the other guys played on it are super talented. James Lomenzo, I mean, a lot of people remember he was the bass player in White Lion, and then he also played, in Megadeth, and he played with Zakk Wylde. So he's been all over the place. He's a huge talent. And then Brian Tishy, super talented guy. He can play like the guitar. He can sing. But he's mostly known for playing the drums. He's played with Ozzy, Whitesnake, the Dead Daisy. He's been all over the place too. Super talented guy. So it's a record label that they try to put these guys together, like these guys that came from the 80s or from that time period, and that were popular at the time. We'll throw them in a band together. And originally, I think, like George and Michael Sweet, they were like, oh, we're going to go out and do a tour together. But it never, and they've done 2 albums together at this point. But even George has said that's the problem. They give you so much money, you go in the studio and you throw an album together, and then because everybody's involved in different projects, there's never time to go out and tour behind it.
Right. It's difficult because things aren't the way that they used to be, where you would put a record out and you go on tour, and you would make money off the record and you would make money off the tour. Now it doesn't hold water either way. And most bands are lucky if they break even, especially if you're getting an advance from a record label, because they're not doing this to not make money. They're business people.
And that's,
that money has to get paid back, and it's tough, man. I'm not saying that these guys are all on the street, begging for food.
No.
But at the same time, it's nowhere close to what it used to be.
I mean, even like the thing is,
they got to do all these bands and all these projects.
That's why they're doing.
Same thing with Tim Owens. I've heard people give him shit, calling him a band whore, and he's in 10 different bands or 15 different bands. Well, you know what? If that's what he has to do to take care of his family and provide and survive, then more power to him. Thank God he's still out there. Thank God that now we have all these different, as fans, that's just a win-win in my opinion. Because now I got all these different records I can go check out that are awesome, and they're different projects, different bands, and different sounds. And maybe people are interested in one, and maybe they won't be interested in the next. But at least it's out there to check out. You know what I'm saying?
And getting back to Sweet and Lynch, I mean, the interesting thing, see, a lot of those projects, they really are just kind of afterthoughts, because there's a lot of, like, before they come out, there's like a huge, like, you're hearing about it in the press, you're hearing about it, this album's going to come out, in May or whenever, and there's a huge buildup, and then it kind of like, there's just a little thump, release date comes, if there's any shows at all, it's very limited, and then like a week or two later, people forgot about the album, and then they move on to the next project. But I will say, before moving on, Michael Sweet, super talented guy, and I don't know if you know about.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you know about this, but besides Striper, do you know what's the most successful other band he's been in? This is going to surprise you when I tell you, I think.
Boston.
Yeah, there you go. A legendary band from the 70s. A lot of people know, More Than a Feeling. But when their singer committed suicide, he stepped in for him, and he did a super job of that, and I was like hoping that.
Yeah, I give him a ton of credit. The guy, like I said, the guy's got an awesome voice, and I mean, if Boston is calling you up to fill in their shoes,
who wouldn't do that?
You're obviously a pretty damn good singer.
Yeah, and he did a great job of filling in. And the thing with Michael Sweet, I mean, he can't, he's one of those vocalists too, but very much like George we're talking about, he can do various different types of music. I mean, he has some project with Tracy Guns. They're about ready to release an album. I think it's on the same label called Sunburst or something like that. But getting back to when he was in Boston, I mean, he just did a super job of replacing the guy. And he can sing Striper stuff. He can sing like.
Yeah, you can go online and check out some of those live performances, and if people aren't familiar, definitely treat yourself. Go check out some of the Boston live performances on YouTube with Michael singing. I mean,
and it's Striper. They put out a great covers album a number of years ago. It had a cover of a Boston song, "Peace of Mind." They've also covered, like, if you can believe it, Michael Sweet doing Black Sabbath, the song. After Forever, I mean, he just killed it, doing Sabbath. You couldn't even imagine that.
Yeah. Now, jumping ahead to where we're at now, these are probably two of my favorite projects from George, and that's, of course, The End Machine and Dirty Shirley.
Yeah.
What's your take on both of those projects?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm more familiar with The End Machine, which I would say is kind of a modern version, I would say, of Dokken, and that you got you got George Lynch and Jeff Pilson, of course, from Dokken, the bass player and the guitar god. And then you got Robert Mason, who his connection is not just through this, but also through Lynch Mob. So they've got... And then Jeff Pilson, people forget, but he's played bass like on one or two Lynch Mob albums. So he's actually... you could consider him like part of Lynch Mob as well. And so you...
Yeah, I'll say that, especially this the second record, watched a few videos, a few interviews with Jeff and with George Lynch on The End Machine. And on this Phase 2 record that they put out, obviously because of the pandemic stuff, things were different for them recording-wise. They couldn't just all get together in a room and go for it. So they sent stuff back and forth, they pieced the stuff together like that. And you would never know it, man. I mean, you listen to this record and it's raw, it's rock and roll. I mean, it's good.
And see, I think it's because...
and I love the combination of Jeff Pilson's voice with Robert's voice. They sound great together. I mean, they're just... It's like toast and butter, man. I mean, they sound really good together. And the songs are strong, and it's almost like as if George reinvented himself again.
I kind of think so.
You hear him play, you know it's him, but at the same time, I'm hearing different things that he's doing with the guitar, and I'm going, oh, wow, that was really cool,
Yeah.
I'm doing that a lot as I'm listening to The End Machine
See,
stuff.
of all these...
it's not a real heady or aggressive metal album. It's a hard rock, melodic rock album, but it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I dare say it's probably the most developed project he's done, maybe since Lynch Mob or Dokken. I mean, and that this is the second album they've done with that band of all these. And then I think because, so this is like the second In Machine album. So this is like his third album that he's actually recorded with Robert Mason. So I think this is almost kind of imagine if Robert Mason had stayed in Lynch Mob from that second album on. This is what that would have turned into. And I think this is kind of a continuation of that. And so he can go, George is going to a studio with Robert Mason and Jeff Pilson, who he's worked a number of times with. So they got that comfort. And I think this is more of a developed band as well because you got these great songwriters. You got, Jeff Pilson, George Lynch, Robert Mason. They're all great singers. And I think it's a great chance for Mason because... as most people know, he's in Warren. He's the guy who replaced the late, great Janie Lane. But, they've done 2 great albums with Robert. But let's be honest, when people go see Warren, they want to hear all those great, famous Janie Lane songs.
Of course.
And he does a great job. And what's interesting about Mason is I understand that him and Janie were actually friends. And I think, I remember hearing Mason talk about when he first joined Lynch Mob, that they opened some shows for Warren. And Janie, encouraged him to that's where him and Janie first met, and he gave him shout outs from the stage and stuff, and that's part of the reason when Janie could no longer tour when he was still alive and he kept falling off the wagon and stuff. He told the guys, look, Robert's the guy, if you're going to get anybody else to do it, Robert's the guy that I think can do it. And so Janie had a lot to do with Robert Mason being in Warrant now.
Right, yeah. Oh, I'm sure, yeah. Real quick, with the Dirty Shirley, I didn't realize this till today.
Yeah.
Because I loved what I heard, and I just thought, wow, this is killer. And it just like poof, it just vanished, fell off the face of the earth. But they can't do another album until Dino sorts out some legal problems.
Yeah, I read that recently. And here's the thing with that now. Of all these things we talked about, like, I think the In Machine is probably the most kind of these bands, it's like the most potential to kind of build upon. Probably KXM, that's probably the next one. I mean, as far as, because they've done like 3 albums too, so there's something to build on, I'd like to see him at least do a tour, do some shows with KXM because, of course, like we said, Ray Luzier, super talented guy. Doug Pinnick, he's kind of the he's one of those guys. I mean, he's got a lengthy career himself with King's X, but King's X is one of those bands too. But unless you're like a real diehard fan, a lot of people have never even heard of them, and they're a great little band. And I think Doug Pinnick in KXM, he's getting a kind of a new vehicle to kind of shine in, and I think it would be cool to see them do another album. They've done 3, and I will say, each time they do a new album, I think they get better and better with each release. I will say that. So with Dirty Shirley, I remember when the album came out. I don't know why I didn't get it, but because I liked the video and I thought, wow, this is great stuff. But again, I'm like, who is this guy? Dino, whatever. He's some Italian singer, like you said. Frontiers hooked him up with George, and super singer. But unfortunately, whatever his legal problems are. But again, people have just forgot about the album, so I don't know if they need to get in there and do another album. But at that point, they'll have 2 albums under their belt, maybe. But I mean, if they could break that, because I mean, this is a guy I never heard of before, Dirty Shirley. And I'm like, wow, I love what that guy's doing on that.
Yeah, he was a killer singer. And the funny thing is George agreed to do the project, just like I was told.
Not even knowing who he was.
Put these projects together, and they mentioned this guy Dino, Italian guy, and
he's like, who's that?
For whatever reason, George thought he was a pop singer, so he thought that would be interesting. It'd be something totally different. Okay, I'll try that, And then he walks in, and he's just got this massive voice, and in George's actual words, he said, "Holy shit, this guy's like Ronnie James Dio and David Coverdale had a baby."
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some of the stuff. It's that good, and it's just kind of interesting. Again, it fell by the wayside. Now, let me ask you, Joe, another album that comes to mind is, did you ever hear another project that he did with Jeff Pilson, which was an album called T&N, and they remade like some Dokken tunes, Lynch Mob tunes. I forget what else was on there. And they had Sebastian Bach come and do a song. I think Mick Brown played the drums on the album.
Yeah, it seems like him and Jeff have had some more time on their hands, and there's a couple projects that they've done. They've done remakes on some things, and their most recent, I think, in regards to that, correct me if I'm wrong, is an album called Heavy Hitters. They actually redid a Carole King song and an REM song, and stuff like that. I mean, it's good and it's tasteful, but it was just it caught me off guard. It was really strange. I was like, what? I go to listen to it. I'm like, oh, cool, Heavy Hitters, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? That's
why I sent it to you, because I've heard of the album. Again, that's one I want to, that I plan on buying. I just haven't bought it yet, but I know you can get it like on Amazon and stuff. But here's the thing, like you said, like I remember hearing them talk about, Jeff and George about doing this project together, Heavy Hitters, and like when you hear the concept, which is kind of like you said, we're going to go in and kind of like redo these pop tunes, but kind of metalize them. Like I was listening to that track I sent you today. I don't know if you had a chance to call the REM track, which is
it's the end of the world.
The end of the world as we know it. And like I'm listening to it, and okay, I know it's an REM tune, but as I'm listening to it, it's like, I've heard this song before a million times, but it sounds very different. But I was kind of digging it, if you know what I mean. What was your response when you heard that?
Yeah, me too. I mean, like I said, it caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to
respond,
really perceive it. Yeah. But as I was listening to it, I'm like, man, they actually did a pretty good job of these tunes.
And like even there's a Prince,
just because they're such talented people,
Yeah, and I think that, like we're talking about, that makes them much better more rounded musician. The fact that you could, a guy like George Lynch is willing to get him in the studio and he's gonna do a metal version of REM. Or they also covered Prince's Kiss, which was a big hit back in the '80s. But again, he's just kind of going in there and saying, hey Jeff, let's see if we can let's see how this comes out. Let's see.
Let's challenge ourselves. Let's push ourselves in as many different directions as we can.
Yeah, and these are tunes that they don't play. I think there's even a Duran Duran tune on there, but these are tunes like that they probably haven't played a million times, and so they probably did have to go in and kind of learn it, and it's kind of challenging. I mean, I would like to see George do what he's talking about, like go out as a George Lynch experience or whatever he's going to call it, and just say, what, let's he's going to put like a band together, and it could be anybody. It doesn't have to really be a set group of musicians, and he's going to play like all these different songs we've been talking about. Oh, we'll throw in a Dokken tune, we'll throw in a Lynch Mob tune, we'll do a KXM tune, or let's throw in a corner tune, whatever. And I think that would be cool,
Yeah, it would be a different experience, and it would, depending upon you'd have to get the right players and especially the right singer to cover all those different bands. I mean, there's only a few people that could really honestly do that justice. So he's going to have to be really picky, and I'm sure he will be with a live lineup. If that ever is allowed to happen again. Yeah. But we may have mentioned this and we may have not. But I wanted to bring it up was George Lynch said at a guitar seminar that he was given. He wishes Judas Priest would call him up.
Oh yes, I forgot about it. Yeah.
Now that to me is a really interesting idea because I know a lot of Priest fans want to see the band continue, but they want the original lineup. I get that. I understand that. But you know what? We're in the really real world here, people. Yeah. Unfortunately and sadly, Glenn has succumbed to Parkinson's, and he can't go on. He can't tour anymore. He can't do what he used to be able to do with the guitar. Thank God we have all the wonderful music that Glenn and KK and those guys put out. And I hope that they're able to somehow do something in the future too.
Yeah.
But that being said, I don't think that the band should stop. I mean, maybe some people do, and I would respect that. I mean, all those guys are getting up there. They're in their 70s. So if they said, you know what, they don't have nothing to prove anymore. They don't need the money anymore. If they wanted to stop, they could. But at the same time, for the sake of the fans, I think George playing Glenn's parts with Richie Faulkner, I would pay to see that in a fucking New York minute.
Oh yeah, because I mean nothing against Andy Sneap. I mean he's a great guitar player in his own right.
The guy's great.
But I think a lot more people would go for like because a lot of people are like Andy Sneap, who's that? But everybody knows who George Lynch is. You know what I mean? And it'd be an interesting combination.
Not that Priest needs George Lynch's name.
No. But
it would add to it. Yeah. Yes, it would add to it, and I think a lot of people would be real interested in seeing that. Me being one of them.
And part of what we're talking about tonight, George,
I think he would do a phenomenal job, and that would be a really killer thing to see.
Yeah, part of what we're talking about, Joe, tonight with all these different projects he's done throughout his career is, if something like that was to happen, George has got a huge little fan base, and it goes way beyond just Dokken or just Lynch Mob, and so playing with Judas Priest, I mean, he'd bring all those fans with him. Not that Priest doesn't have a fanfare, but they got their own fans. But I'm just saying, you'd have that much more people coming along for a ride. And another interesting thing you and I were recently talking about is the fact that George Lynch himself, he's auditioned twice to be an Ozzy band. The first time was in 1979, where he lost out to Randy Rhoads. And then Brad Gillis, once Randy was killed in the plane crash, Brad Gillis from Night Ranger, he briefly came in and replaced Randy. And then in 1982, when Brad Gillis left to go back to Night Ranger, from what I understand, again, 1982 this is, George Lynch was offered the Ozzy gig. He auditioned, he got the gig, and basically it was Sharon Osbourne who told Ozzy to let go of George and hire Jakey Lee. And here's the reason why. She thought at the time, I guess, that Jakey Lee had more of a rock star look than George did. And so Jake got the gig.
And at the time, George had short hair because the job that he was working required him to have short hair. He had like a delivery job or something like that, and he had shorter hair. But that's just goes to show you, you know, these people are real life people. Even, you know, especially back in the early '80s, you know, George Lynch was not the name that he is now.
Oh yeah.
You know, so those guys, you know, for all intents and purposes, most or all those guys had to have day jobs.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, I read too that George, like, I think at the time he got the Ozzy gig, he was delivering like on the side, like to make money, like you're saying, delivering liquor. Like people would buy liquor and he'd deliver to the different liquor stores or whatever, and so that's what he did. And just kind of, but George Lynch, he's been on the scene for years. Like I understand too, before he got the offer to join Ozzy's band, I think that's where he met Randy. And then when he didn't get the gig back in '79, he started working at Randy's, the family's musical school in Burbank. So he even has an affiliation with that, which I just recently found out about.
Yeah, how awesome is that, huh?
Yeah. Just think how long he's been on the scene. And I before we wrap this up tonight, Joe, I want to really encourage people to go check out our This Is Metal Facebook page. It's like it's a group you can go to. We post stuff. We let you know when we're gonna post things. We try to start up different posts. We really thank the people who've been taking part in that, and we urge you to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting because I try to get on there almost daily, and we're getting new members each and every day. So I think that's a great thing, and just like we have one guy, Joe Davis, I guess he's a mutual friend, James Davis, excuse me, and he's always posting stuff and making comments. So I dig that, and it's kind of
we need to see more of that. Absolutely.
And it's kind of funny too because he's a musician himself. He hasn't been a part of the music scene for like 30 years, but he told me that he's a mutual friend of yours. And he's got great stories that I've heard about, and and he actually made a connection on the This Is Metal page with this guy Gordon Titsworth, who he's the lead singer of this band Images of Eden that I interviewed twice now, and he I think Gordon actually replaced James in this band Born of Fire, so they reconnected on the page, so I think that's kind of cool.
Cool. See, I mean, we're already playing Cupid.
Yeah, and then and then before we wrapped it up tonight, I also want to tell people that also I just posted on the This Is Metal page. Our friend Sean Peck, he's got his own label, Steel Cartel Records, and I got an email of like future releases that are going to be coming out this year, and just to kind of whet your metal appetite, I'm going to get a couple new Death Dealer releases. I think an EP, a full length, and then we're going to get also a new Three Tremors and a new Cage CD, and he's got some other stuff coming out. So we always love to support everything Sean Peck's involved with.
Absolutely.
So do you have anything left to say, Joe, before we wrap this up for tonight?
No, I hope everybody checks some of these projects out. Like I said, everybody's probably pretty familiar with George Lynch being the guitar player in Dokken and maybe Lynch Mob. But check out some of these other projects that he's got going on, especially, like I said, The End Machine and Dirty Shirley. Highly recommend it. Good stuff.
Oh, and before we go, I forgot to mention another release to check out. It's a solo release, one of these solo albums George did. It's him like doing covers of like classic metal rock songs. Like it's called Furious George, and he's got a version of Stormbringer, which is a great Deep Purple cover. And then also did like the Montrose tune, Space Station No. 5. Great stuff on there. And that's one that's kind of been forgotten about. But I really urge people to check that out. And you have been listening to This Is Metal. And Joe Lawson, I'll be talking to you again real soon. Take care of yourselves, my friend.
You too, brother.
Bye-bye.